Good morning. It's good to be among you again. For those who don't know me, I'm John Brandt. My partner Stephanie, Hannah, and I split our lives between Lancaster and Winnipeg, Canada. My wife has longer roots here, but I've been a part of CMCL for the past year now and glad to be part of this community. I've been grateful for CMCL's exploration of Anabaptism these past few Sundays. I've missed a couple as we're back in Winnipeg for the next few months, but they've been a good opportunity to remind myself why I'm a Mennonite. Oh, and starting on a bit of a side note, I refer to myself as ethnically Mennonite and theologically Anabaptist. Helps me distinguish between the food, language, history aspects, and the faith questions. I come out of the Russian Mennonite tradition, starting in Holland through Germany, Prussia, and Russia, with my grandparents coming to Canada in the early 1900s. Bit of a different trajectory than many of the ethnic Mennonites in Pennsylvania who come to North America earlier, mostly out of Switzerland. I value my history and love my traditions, especially some of the foods, which you folks are definitely missing out on. But sometimes our conversations get too focused on the cultural trappings, and popular media does enjoy lumping all Mennonites and Amish together. All that to say, when I speak about my faith, I generally think about it as Anabaptism. So, what do I mean when I say I'm an Anabaptist? I think Anabaptism is pretty cool and the best way to understand and engage with faith. And yes, I'm biased, and I'm okay with that. Well, generally, when someone asks what's an Anabaptist or why are you an Anabaptist, I get really excited and try not to throw a whole bunch of terms and a lot of history at them. But since I have you as a captive audience, buckle up. Some of the sermons, looking back at some of the sermons we've heard this year, I was grateful for Verna's telling of the story of the Schleitheim Confession. There are a couple other important confessions during that time as well, but Schleitheim holds a special place for many. And it's significant that it's a confession, not a creed. This concept alone is worthy of a sermon, but today it'll just be a snippet. Creeds, such as the Apostles' Creed, declare in absolute terms what is to be believed. It is a distilling of theology and Christology in a few defined statements. A confession is an understanding of how we should live. And Anabaptism has always been more about orthopraxy, correct behavior or actions, than orthodoxy, correct words or beliefs. It's the reason Mennonite Central Committee, an organization focused on doing, is our largest parachurch organization, not the Mission Network or other church planting organizations. And Ron's telling of the first baptism, how it signaled a theological understanding, but also a massive political one. No longer was the state in charge of the church and who was in or out. Yes, the notion of adult baptism was born out of the theological idea that one should be old enough to make a conscious, informed decision about one's faith, but it also meant that children were no longer being listed in the combined church-state roles. This was a huge problem for taxation and control of people. Adult baptism was a form of nonviolent resistance and a statement against the ruling authority. Also, the baptism moved the authority for church rites out of the hands of priests and into the hands of the laity. Anyone with the blessing of the congregation could baptize or marry. It created greater freedom and continued to dismantle the power of the Catholic Church. So Anabaptism for me centers around three things: community hermeneutic, discipleship, and pacifism, some of which I've touched on already and will outline more fully. Community hermeneutic is a fancy way of saying group decision making, especially when it comes to faith and the Bible. Ever since the early days, and Verna highlighted this in how the Schleitheim Confession was created, Anabaptists have come together to make decisions around what it means to be a Christ follower. And that term is important, as it's not simply about believing, but following. Luther was famous for his term sola scriptura, or scripture alone, as authoritative. And so you have many within the Protestant faith who believe that someone can sit alone with the Bible and understand all they need to. Catholics didn't appreciate that, as they hold to the pairing of scripture and tradition, hence the Protestant Reformation, short version. Anabaptists have always held to a third way and understand that faith is best understood within community. So decisions around faithful practice and how to read and interpret scripture is done within community, as demonstrated by the creation of the Anabaptist Bible this past year. The second element for me is discipleship. The doing, the orthopraxy, is what demonstrates our faith. I believe strongly that we must live out our faith. This may not seem revolutionary to many of you, but coming out of a historical milieu where saying the right words and going through the rituals of faith is how one demonstrated faith, this was, and still often is, seen as a marked departure. It's why Anabaptists hold more closely to the Sermon on the Mount than almost any other passage in the Bible. It's about the doing of faith and the challenge that it is. Dietrich Bonhoeffer, although not an Anabaptist, is widely admired for his Cost of Discipleship book, worth checking out if not familiar. Skip the recent film, however. Connected to this, which I won't spend time on, is simplicity, more overtly demonstrated by the Amish and Old Order Mennonites, but still something that's woven through many of our communities. The final, and the perhaps most familiar, is pacifism. If Anabaptists are known publicly for anything, it would be the aforementioned simplicity and pacifism. The obvious element of pacifism is not going to war. Pacifism was an element very early on, although not universal. We were involved in the Peasants' War in Europe, and also a large group launched the Munster Rebellion in 1534 in an attempt to create a communal sectarian government. This went quite badly. Definitely not bedtime reading. But one of the results was a strong turn toward baptism and rejection of the sword. This also moved Anabaptists more strongly to reject involvement in government. Menno Simons, among others, pushed to keep Anabaptists separate, acknowledging there's still a place for government, that Anabaptists should not be involved as it would require the use of the sword. Now that's shifted over time, but there's still a reticence by many to be too involved with government. And pacifism has been a source of many of our migrations as a community. From the Russian Mennonite tradition, different countries would welcome us as we were known as good workers who kept to themselves. We'd be promised some level of autonomy and no military conscription. However, over time, during some new conflict, that promise was threatened and we'd have to go look elsewhere. In Russia, even, however, some self-defense groups were formed to protect communities during the early 1900s. And this has been a source of much consternation and discussion. This pacifist position has definitely put us at odds with the broader community, especially during World War II. There are some excellent stories out there, including the book Sam Martin Went to Prison and the play Yellow Bellies, which document this. One of the positives coming out of the last 40 years has been the strength of Anabaptist peacemaking and conflict resolution. We are known globally for our work in this. This also can be the most challenging to articulate, as there's strong support for the just war theory, and the military is ubiquitous in this country. Some simply can't believe that one wouldn't support the troops. And pacifism is more than simply anti-war. It is the way I attempt to enter all my interactions, not with passivity, but with an authentic desire for peace and community, regardless of differences. And so I enter the world with love for my neighbor and also for myself, working for peace within myself so that I can work for peace in the world. Now, I know I struggle with all of this. I want to go it alone and make decisions on my own. To be a jerk, not living out of Christ's love. And God knows I don't always act peaceably with myself or those around me. And I also believe these three give the best way forward to being Christ followers. I lean as best I can on God to live out this daily. So thanks for this opportunity as a relative newcomer and erstwhile attendee to share. I'm passionate about what it means to be an Anabaptist and how it's shaped who I am. And I'd happily talk with any of you about it further. I continue to believe that we are stronger, more faithful when we make decisions together, when we live out those decisions through clear actions and do all we can to enter the world with love, creating God's peaceable kingdom. Peace to you all.